All day and night, save winter, every weather, above the inn, the smithy, and the shop, the aspens at the crossroads talk together of rain until their last leaves fall from the top. Out of the blacksmith's cavern comes the ringing of hammer, shoe, and anvil. Out of the inn, the clink, the hum, the roar, the random singing, the sounds that for these 50 years have been. The whisper of the aspens is not drowned, and over lightless pane and footless road, empty as sky, with every other sound not ceasing, calls their ghosts from their abode. A silent smithy, a silent inn, nor fails in the bare moonlight or the thick-furred gloom, in tempest or the night of nightingales, to turn the crossroads to a ghostly room. And it would be the same were no house near, over all sorts of weather, men, and times. Aspens must shake their leaves, and men may hear, but need not listen, more than to my rhymes. Whatever wind blows, while they and I have leaves, we cannot other than an aspen be, that ceaselessly, unreasonably grieves, or so men think, who like a different tree. That was Aspens by my boy, Mr. Edward Thomas, and I thought because Sam does cold opens now, I would give it a go. It is one of my favourite poems, that one, and I do like a bit of Edward Thomas. He is local to my area as well, so yes, a lot of his poems are actually sort of about places what I have been. Anyway, hello everybody. Hope we're all well. Welcome in. I feel like I've got a bit of my dinner stuck in my throat. It's unnecessary information for you all, but yes, apologies if I start having to clear my throat halfway through today. Hello. Welcome to Gilliteracy. Happy Wednesday. I hope we're all well. Sorry for last week's absence of stream. I have no idea what was going on. I was probably just really not feeling it. I don't know. I've had a bit of a difficult few months. Yeah. At this rate. But yes, we accept your apology. I am very glad. Hello. Who have we got? We've got everyone tonight, it seems. Lady Mephistopheles, Parola, Hat, Ray Tracer, Andy Pants. Yes, they're all similar colours. It's all very confusing. Yes, welcome in, everybody. Oh, I've got bloody flies everywhere. Go away, shoo. The gang is indeed all here. And your name's Orange. Hi, name's Orange. Yes. Yes, excuse me. Today I have a selection of stories. Hopefully we'll get through all three. That doesn't even work. Shut up. You don't even work. Savage. See, now Andy's getting on it. Excellent. Yes, I sort of accidentally chose 3 stories that, well, the first 2 stories I was like, ooh, I'll choose these 2, and then the third one I deliberately sought out a story by a woman author. So we have 3 female authors today. I tried to put all the details in the stream title and it wouldn't let me because everything was too long. So yeah. But yeah, how are we all doing? Have we had an okay start to our weeks? Blame the patriarchy, exactly. I hope we've all had a decent start to our weeks. I saw Lady Mephistopheles saying that you're not working tomorrow. Nice. Always good. No work is always a good thing. I'm gonna be taking a couple of composers around various old places in the UK. So I've got my composer road trip tomorrow, which is going to be entertaining because my car's not very big. And one of my friends is fairly tall, so might have to fold himself up into the back of my car. Also, hello, Llama Llama. I'm just going to call you Llama because I never know how to pronounce your name. Welcome in. Road trip, exactly. Minecraft 1.20 and Rocky Road to Dublin both appeared. Yes, I didn't realise Minecraft 1.20 dropped today. Ooh. This might mean that Sam and I will have to get back on the Minecraft train, which means I have to build yet another base, which will probably get lost to yet another glitch or something. Tall friends in small cars is your one revenge as a short person. Same. It's great. Literally the minute James was ending his stream earlier. Oh dear. Whoops. Your car is a 40-year-old truck that only fits 2 people, so yours is better suited than mine. Fair enough. You're out playing archaeology. Oh, yeah. Cool. Nice. Make sure to introduce them to land shanties. You see, I'm one of these people who doesn't actually know, really, or has never tried to, like, hook my phone up to my car and actually play things from my phone. Not least because I don't have Spotify Premium or anything, so things will be interrupted by adverts and stuff. I don't have a huge amount of data on my phone, and I've never really properly. Yeah, I'm a dinosaur. I still use CDs. I still listen to the radio. I sadly do not have the wherewithal to put on actual playlists. I probably should, because there's plenty of music that I would love to listen to, but yeah, need to learn how to do that. I am actually a grandma at heart. Replace your car stereo to be because the CD player died and got a new one with Bluetooth by accident. Ah, nice. CDs and radio are good. Thank you. Tybert? I am not entirely sure. Do correct me. But welcome in. Hello. I see you are first-time chatter. Welcome. You just Bluetooth the Pandora from your phone to the car and listen to Darby O'Gill. Okay. Cool. Fair enough. I mean, my phone is Bluetooth to my car, so that would make sense. Your music's all on SD card on your phone. Yeah, that's the thing, because I don't actually... I'm not really... Yeah, I don't pay for any streaming services, so I'm like, this is just going to be full of adverts. Or I'm going to be limited to things. So instead I put on Radio 3 and I just take whatever they give me. And if it's something I think I recognise, I will sit there for about 10 minutes driving going... singing along, because I know it, going, what is this? What is this? Oh, for God's sake, I played this. What is it? Sam can corroborate this story. You sometimes forget you know how to listen to music. You do so professionally, so in your personal time it's mostly podcasts. Yeah. It's Wonderwall every time. Yes, it is. Wonderwall by Bach. But yeah. I sadly don't have a CD player in my car. My dad's car has a CD player. Hidden in the glove compartment, which is interesting. But I kind of wish my car had a CD player. Sad times. But it's a very loud pigeon. Hello. It's just sitting on the telegraph pole outside, shouting. I'm here! But yes, welcome in everyone. So we have, as I say, hopefully 3 stories tonight. 2 slightly shorter ones and 1 slightly longer one. The slightly longer one is in the Oxford Book of English. God, words, ghost stories. There we go. It is allegedly a ghost story. The other 2 are not. So I thought we should start with the ones that aren't, and then do the one that is. Words, exactly. You'd have thought by now we'd be good at it. Good at them. The irony. But no, we are not. But yeah. Is there anything else I need to be saying? Probably not. I'm trying to think if there's anything important that we have done, said we're going to do. Anything? I don't think so. Excuse me indeed. Which story are we starting with? Got links ready. I sent them, I believe, in the order that I was going to read them, so we are going to start with Kew Gardens, because I like Kew Gardens. It's a nice place. For those of you who are British, go to Kew Gardens. Go to Kew Gardens if you want to pay... I don't actually know how expensive it is. Maybe like 15 quid, something like that. That's usual usual sort of place fee. But if you are an RHS member, which is Royal Horticultural Society, which I can't apparently say, Royal Horticultural Society even, then you get in free. And it's a pretty cool place. It's like 300 acres, I think. I've been there many a time. Excuse me. And it is great. But yeah, I guess. Shall we do the thing and read the stuff? I think we shall do the thing and read the stuff. But I will take a sip of water first. Sounds lovely. It is. It's a great place. Right. Are we all sitting comfortably? This bookmark is way too big for this book. I wish to complain. Friend in gardening school had by chance RHS and her license plate. Oh, amazing. Perfect. That's great. Right. Yes, are we all sitting comfortably? I hope we are. I hope we all have some kind of, well, I was going to say warm beverage, cool beverage, or snack. And yes, we shall begin with Kew Gardens by Virginia Woolf. From the oval-shaped flower bed there rose perhaps 100 stalks spreading into heart-shaped or tongue-shaped leaves halfway up and unfurling at the tip red or blue or yellow petals marked with spots of colour raised upon the surface. And from the red, blue or yellow gloom of the throat emerged a straight bar, rough with gold dust and slightly clubbed at the end. The petals were voluminous enough to be stirred by the summer breeze, and when they moved, the red, blue and yellow lights passed one over the other, staining an inch of the brown earth beneath with a spot of the most intricate colour. The light fell either upon the smooth grey back of a pebble, or the shell of a snail with its brown circular veins, or, falling into a raindrop, it expanded with such intensity of red, blue and yellow the thin walls of water that one expected them to burst and disappear. Instead, the drop was left in a second silver grey once more, and the light now settled upon the flesh of a leaf, revealing the branching thread of fibre beneath the surface, and again it moved on and spread its illumination in the vast green spaces beneath the dome of the heart-shaped and tongue-shaped leaves. Then the breeze stirred rather more briskly overhead, and the colour was flashed into the air above, into the eyes of the men and women who walk in Kew Gardens in July. The figures of these men and women straggled past the flower bed with a curiously irregular movement, not unlike that of the white and blue butterflies who cross the turf in zigzag flights from bed to bed. The man was about 6 inches in front of the woman, strolling carelessly, while she bore on with greater purpose, only turning her head now and then to see that the children were not too far behind. The man kept this distance in front of the woman purposely, though perhaps unconsciously, for he wished to go on with his thoughts. 15 years ago I came here with Lily, he thought. We sat somewhere over there by a lake, and I begged her to marry me all through the hot afternoon. How the dragonfly kept circling round us! How clearly I see the dragonfly, and her shoe with the square silver buckle at the toe. All the time I spoke I saw her shoe, and when it moved impatiently, I knew without looking up what she was going to say. The whole of her seemed to be in her shoe. And my love, my desire were in the dragonfly. For some reason I thought that if it settled there, on that leaf, the broad one with the red flower in the middle of it, if the dragonfly settled on the leaf, she would say yes at once. But the dragonfly went round and round. It never settled anywhere. Of course not. Happily not, or I shouldn't be walking here with Eleanor and the children. Tell me, Eleanor, do you ever think of the past? Why do you ask, Simon? Because I've been thinking of the past. I've been thinking of Lily the woman I might have married. Well, why are you silent? Do you mind my thinking of the past? Why should I mind, Simon? Doesn't one always think of the past, in a garden with men and women lying under the trees? Aren't they one's past, all that remains of it, those men and women, those ghosts lying under the trees? One's happiness, one's reality. For me, a square silver shoe buckle and a dragonfly. For me, a kiss. Imagine 6 little girls sitting before their easels 20 years ago, down by the side of a lake, painting the water lilies, the first red water lilies I'd ever seen. And suddenly a kiss, there on the back of my neck. And my hand shook all the afternoon so that I couldn't paint. I took out my watch and marked the hour when I would allow myself to think of the kiss for 5 minutes only. It was so precious. The kiss of an old grey-haired woman with a wart on her nose, the mother of all my kisses all my life. Come, Caroline. Come, Hubert. They walked on past the flower bed, now walking 4 abreast, and soon diminished in size among the trees, and looked half transparent as the sunlight and shade swam over their backs in large, trembling, irregular patches. In the oval flower bed, the snail, whose shell had been stained red, blue and yellow for the space of 2 minutes or so, now appeared to be moving very slightly in its shell, and next began to labour over the crumbs of loose earth which broke away and rolled down as it passed over them. It appeared to have a definite goal in front of it, differing in this respect from the singular high-stepping angular green insect who attempted to cross in front of it, and waited for a second with its antennae trembling as if in deliberation, and then stepped off as rapidly and strangely in the opposite direction. Brown cliffs with deep green lakes in the hollows, flat, blade-like trees that waved from root to tip, round boulders of grey stone, vast, crumpled surfaces of a thin, crackling texture. All these objects lay across the snail's progress between one stalk and another to his goal. Before he had decided whether to circumvent the arched tent of a dead leaf or to breast it, there came past the bed the feet of other human beings. This time they were both men. The younger of the two wore an expression of perhaps unnatural calm. He raised his eyes and fixed them very steadily in front of him, while his companion spoke, and directly his companion had done speaking, he looked on the ground again, and sometimes opened his lips only after a long pause, and sometimes did not open them at all. The elder man had a curiously uneven and shaky method of walking, jerking his hand forward and throwing up his head abruptly, rather in the manner of an impatient carriage horse tired of waiting outside a house. But in the man these gestures were irresolute and pointless. He talked almost incessantly. He smiled to himself and again began to talk, as if the smile had been an answer. He was talking about spirits, the spirits of the dead, who, according to him, were even now telling him all sorts of odd things about their experiences in heaven. Heaven was known to the ancients as Thessaly, William, and now, with this war, the spirit matter is rolling between the hills like thunder. He paused, seemed to listen, smiled, jerked his head, and continued. You have a small electric battery and a piece of rubber to insulate the wire. Isolate? Insulate. Well, we'll skip the details. No good going into details that wouldn't be understood. And in short, the little machine stands in any convenient position by the head of the bed, we will say on a neat mahogany stand, all arrangements being properly fixed by workmen under my direction. The widow applies her ear and summons the spirit by sign as agreed. Women, widows, women in black. Here he seemed to have caught sight of a woman's dress in the distance, which in the shade looked a purple-black. He took off his hat, placed his hand upon his heart, and hurried towards her, muttering and gesticulating feverishly. But William caught him by the sleeve and touched a flower with the tip of his walking stick in order to divert the old man's attention. After looking at it for a moment in some confusion, the old man bent his ear to it and seemed to answer a voice speaking from it, for he began talking about the forests of Uruguay, which he had visited hundreds of years ago in company with the most beautiful young woman in Europe. He could be heard murmuring about forests of Uruguay blanketed with the wax petals of tropical roses, nightingales, sea beaches, mermaids, and women drowned at sea, as he suffered himself to be moved on by William, upon whose face the look of stoical patience grew slowly deeper and deeper. Following his steps so closely as to be slightly puzzled by his gestures, came two elderly women of the lower middle class, one stout and ponderous, the other rosy-cheeked and nimble. Like most people of their station, they were frankly fascinated by any signs of eccentricity betokening a disordered brain, especially in the well-to-do, but they were too far off to be certain whether the gestures were merely eccentric or genuinely mad. After they had scrutinized the old man's back in silence for a moment and given each other a queer, sly look, they went on energetically piecing together their very complicated dialogue. Nell, Bert, Lot, Cess, Phil, Pa, he says, I says, she says, I says, my Bert, Sis, Bill, Grandad, the old man, sugar, flour, kippers, greens, sugar. The ponderous woman looked through the pattern of falling words at the flowers, standing cool, firm and upright in the earth, with a curious expression. She saw them as a sleeper waking from a heavy sleep sees a brass candlestick reflecting the light in an unfamiliar way, and closes his eyes and opens them, and seeing the brass candlestick again, finally starts broad awake and stares at the candlestick with all his powers. So the heavy woman came to a standstill opposite the oval-shaped flower bed, and ceased even to pretend to listen to what the other woman was saying. She stood there, letting the words fall over her, swaying the top part of her body slowly backwards and forwards, looking at the flowers. Then she suggested that they should find a seat and have their tea. The snail had now considered every possible method of reaching his goal without going round the dead leaf or climbing over it. Let alone the effort needed for climbing a leaf, he was doubtful whether the thin texture which vibrated with such an alarming crackle when touched even by the tip of his horns would bear his weight, and this determined him finally to creep beneath it, for there was a point where the leaf curved high enough from the ground to admit him. He had just inserted his head in the opening and was taking stock of the high brown roof and was getting used to the cool brown light when two other people came past outside on the turf. This time they were both young, a young man and a young woman. They were both in the prime of youth, or even in that season which precedes the prime of youth, the season before the smooth pink folds of the flower have burst their gummy case, when the wings of the butterfly, though fully grown, are motionless in the sun. "Lucky it isn't Friday," he observed. "Why? Do you believe in luck?" "They make you pay sixpence on Friday." "What's sixpence anyway? Isn't it worth sixpence?" "What's it? What do you mean by it?" "Oh, anything. I mean, you know what I mean." Long pauses came between each of these remarks. They were uttered in toneless and monotonous voices. The couple stood still on the edge of the flower bed, and together pressed the end of her parasol deep down into the soft earth. The action and the fact that his hand rested on the top of hers expressed their feelings in a strange way, as these short, insignificant words also expressed something, words with short wings for their heavy body of meaning, inadequate to carry them far, and thus alighting awkwardly upon the very common objects that surrounded them, and were to their inexperienced touch so massive. But who knows, so they thought as they pressed the parasol into the earth, what precipices aren't concealed in them, or what slopes of ice don't shine in the sun on the other side. Who knows? Who has ever seen this before? Even when she wondered what sort of tea they gave you at Kew, he felt that something loomed up behind her words, and stood vast and solid behind them, and the mist very slowly rose and uncovered— oh heavens, what were those shapes? Little white tables, and waitresses who looked first at her and then at him, and there was a bill that he would pay with a real 2-shilling piece, and it was real, all real, he assured himself, fingering the coin in his pocket. Real to everyone except to him and to her. Even to him it began to seem real, and then— But it was too exciting to stand and think any longer, and he pulled the parasol out of the earth with a jerk, and was impatient to find the place where one had tea with other people, like other people. "Come along, Trissy, it's time we had our tea." "Wherever does one have one's tea?" she asked with the oddest thrill of excitement in her voice, looking vaguely round and letting herself be drawn on down the grass path, trailing her parasol, turning her head this way and that way, forgetting her tea, wishing to go down there and then down there, remembering orchids and cranes among wild flowers, a Chinese pagoda and a crimson-crested bird. But he bore her on. Thus one couple after another, with much the same irregular and aimless movement, passed the flower bed, and were enveloped in layer after layer of green-blue vapour, in which at first their bodies had substance and a dash of colour, but later both substance and colour dissolved in the green-blue atmosphere. How hot it was! So hot that even the thrush chose to hop like a mechanical bird in the shadow of the flowers, with long pauses between one movement and the next, instead of rambling vaguely, the white butterflies danced one above another, making with their white shifting flakes the outline of a shattered marble column above the tallest flowers. The glass roofs of the palm house shone as if a whole market full of shiny green umbrellas had opened in the sun, and in the drone of the aeroplane the voice of the summer sky murmured its fierce soul. Yellow and black, pink and snow white, shapes of all these colours, men, women and children were spotted for a second upon the horizon, and then, seeing the breadth of yellow that lay upon the grass, they wavered and sought shade beneath the trees, dissolving like drops of water in the yellow and green atmosphere, staining it faintly with red and blue. It seemed as if all gross and heavy bodies had sunk down in the heat, motionless, and lay huddled upon the ground, but their voices went wavering from them as if they were flames lolling from the thick waxen bodies of candles. Voices. Yes, voices. Wordless voices, breaking the silence suddenly with such depth of contentment, such passion of desire, or, in the voices of children, such freshness of surprise, breaking the silence. But there was no silence. All the time the motor omnibuses were turning their wheels and changing their gear, like a vast nest of Chinese boxes, all of wrought steel turning ceaselessly one within another, the city murmured, on the top of which the voices cried aloud, and the petals of myriads of flowers flashed their colours into the air. The end. So that was Kew Gardens by Virginia Woolf. Not necessarily a story as such, more of an exploration of just a bit of nice poetic prose. Also, hello, cat who walks by herself. Hope you are well. Welcome in. You've only just missed the first story. We're doing two more. This one was quite a short one, but yeah, I mean, if you want to head off, obviously, go do that. But you haven't missed too much. Also, thank you very much, Thunder. Almost 2 years, blimey. Thank you very much for the resub. And Tibbet, still don't know how to pronounce it. Thank you very much for the follow. Welcome in. But yes, I hope everybody enjoyed that. I do wish Virginia Woolf would use commas a bit more. Her sentences do have a tendency to run on a bit. And she does sort of does suddenly change direction in them. But yes, I hope you enjoyed that. I was thinking about maybe reading a Virginia Woolf novel at some point down the line, but definitely haven't left your packing to the very last minute again. No, oopsie. I hope that goes quickly. And yes, you're most welcome to stick around for a bit more. I was thinking maybe doing a Virginia Woolf novel at some point, but I might try and find the least depressing one, because bless her, Virginia Woolf didn't exactly have the greatest life, and she wasn't in the greatest place mentally, a lot of it. So a lot of her novels kind of reflect that. So we shall see. But I think we shall continue with our second story of the night. I don't know if Sam is around, but if Sam is around, if you could possibly pin the Voyage, that would be fantastic. Because our next story, if we're all sitting comfortably, is The Voyage by Katherine Mansfield. The Picton boat was due to leave at 11:30. It was a beautiful night, mild, starry. Only when they got out of the cab and started to walk down the old wharf that jutted out into the harbour, a faint wind blowing off the water ruffled under Fenella's hat, and she put up her hand to keep it on. It was dark on the old wharf, very dark. The wool sheds, the cattle trucks, the cranes standing up so high, the little squat railway engine, all seemed carved out of solid darkness. Here and there on a rounded woodpile that was like the stalk of a huge black mushroom, there hung a lantern, but it seemed afraid to unfurl its timid, quivering light in all that blackness. It burned softly, as if for itself. Fenella's father pushed on with quick, nervous strides. Beside him, her grandma bustled along in her crackling black ulster. They went so fast that she had now and again to give an undignified little skip to keep up with them. As well as her luggage strapped into a neat sausage, Fenella carried clasped to her her grandma's umbrella, and the handle, which was a swan's head, kept giving her shoulder a sharp little peck, as if it too wanted her to hurry. Men, their caps pulled down, their collars turned up, swung by. A few women, all muffled, scurried along, and one tiny boy, only his little black arms and legs showing out of a white woolly shawl, was jerked along angrily between his father and mother. He looked like a baby fly that had fallen into the cream. Then, suddenly, so suddenly that Fenella and her grandma both leapt, there sounded from behind the largest wool shed, that had a trail of smoke hanging over it, meow. "First whistle," said her father briefly, and at that moment they came in sight of the Picton boat. Lying beside the dark wharf, all strung, all beaded with round golden lights, the Picton boat looked as if she was more ready to sail among stars than out into the cold sea. People pressed along the gangway. First went her grandma, then her father, then Fenella. There was a high step down onto the deck, and an old sailor in a jersey standing by gave her his dry, hard hand. They were there. They stepped out of the way of the hurrying people, and standing under a little iron stairway that led to the upper deck, they began to say goodbye. "There, mother, there's your luggage," said Fenella's father, giving Grandma another strapped-up sausage. "Thank you, Frank." "And you've got your cabin tickets safe?" "Yes, dear." "And your other tickets?" Grandma felt for them inside her glove and showed him the tips. "That's right." He sounded stern, but Fenella, eagerly watching him, saw that he looked tired and sad. The second whistle blared just above their heads, and a voice like a cry shouted, "Any more for the gangway?" You'll give my love to Father," Fenella saw her father's lips say. And her grandma, very agitated, answered, "Of course I will, dear. Go now, you'll be left. Go now, Frank. Go now." "It's all right, Mother. I've got another 3 minutes." To her surprise, Fenella saw her father take off his hat. He clasped Grandma in his arms and pressed her to him. "God bless you, Mother," she heard him say. And Grandma put her hand, with the black thread glove that was worn through on her ring finger, against his cheek, and she sobbed, "God bless you, my own brave son." This was so awful that Fenella quickly turned her back on them, swallowed once, twice, and frowned terribly at a little green star on a masthead. But she had to turn round again. Her father was going. "Goodbye, Fenella. Be a good girl." His cold, wet moustache brushed her cheek. But Fenella caught hold of the lapels of his coat. "How long am I going to stay?" she whispered anxiously. He wouldn't look at her. He shook her off gently, and gently said, "We'll see about that. Here, where's your hand?" He pressed something into her palm. "Here's a shilling in case you should need it." A shilling? She must be going away forever. "Father!" cried Fenella. But he was gone. He was the last off the ship. The sailors put their shoulders to the gangway. A huge coil of dark rope went flying through the air and fell thump on the wharf. A bell rang, a whistle shrilled. Silently the dark wharf began to slip, to slide, to edge away from them. Now there was a rush of water between. Fenella strained to see with all her might. Was that Father turning round, or waving, or standing alone, or walking off by himself? The strip of water grew broader, darker. Now the Picton boat began to swing round, steady, pointing out to sea. It was no good looking any longer. There was nothing to be seen but a few lights, the face of the town clock hanging in the air, and more lights, little patches of them, on the dark hills. The freshening wind tugged at Fenella's skirts. She went back to her grandma. To her relief, Grandma seemed no longer sad. She had put the 2 sausages of luggage one on top of the other, and she was sitting on them, her hands folded, her head a little on one side. There was an intent, bright look on her face. Then Fenella saw that her lips were moving, and guessed that she was praying. But the old woman gave her a bright nod, as if to say the prayer was nearly over. She unclasped her hands, sighed, clasped them again, bent forward, and at last gave herself a soft shake. "And now, child," she said, fingering the bow of her bonnet strings, "I think we ought to see about our cabins. Keep close to me, and mind you don't slip." "Yes, Grandma." "And be careful the umbrellas aren't caught in the stair rail. I saw a beautiful umbrella broken in half like that on my way over." "Yes, Grandma." Dark figures of men lounged against the rails. In the glow of their pipes, a nose shone out, or the peak of a cap, or a pair of surprised-looking eyebrows. Fenella glanced up. High in the air, a little figure, his hand thrust in his short jacket pockets, stood staring out to sea. The ship rocked ever so little, and she thought the stars rocked too. and now a pale steward in a linen coat, holding a tray high in the palm of his hand, stepped out of a lighted doorway and skimmed past them. They went through that doorway, carefully over the high brass-bound step onto the rubber mat, and then down such a terribly steep flight of stairs that Grandma had to put both feet on each step, and Fenella clutched the clammy brass rail and forgot all about the swan-necked umbrella. At the bottom Grandma stopped. Fenella was rather afraid that she was going to pray again. But no, it was only to get out the cabin tickets. They were in the saloon. It was glaring bright and stifling. The air smelt of paint and burnt chop bones and India rubber. Fenella wished her Grandma would go on, but the old woman was not to be hurried. An immense basket of ham sandwiches caught her eye. She went up to them and touched the top one delicately with her finger. "How much are the sandwiches?" she asked. "Twopence," bawled a rude steward, slamming down a knife and fork. Grandma could hardly believe it. "Twopence each?" she asked. "That's right," said the steward, and he winked at his companion. Grandma made a small, astonished face. Then she whispered primly to Fenella, "What wickedness!" And they sailed out at the further door and along a passage that had cabins on either side. Such a very nice stewardess came to meet them. She was dressed all in blue, and her collar and cuffs were fastened with large brass buttons. She seemed to know Grandma well. "Well, Mrs. Crane," said she, unlocking their washstand, "we've got you back again. It's not often you give yourself a cabin." "No," said Grandma, "but this time my dear son's thoughtfulness—" "I hope—" began the stewardess. Then she turned round and took a long, mournful look at Grandma's blackness and at Fenella's black coat and skirt, black blouse and hat with a crepe rose. Grandma nodded. "It was God's will," said she. The stewardess shut her lips, and, taking a deep breath, she seemed to expand. "What I always say is," she said, as though it was her own discovery, "sooner or later each of us has to go, and that's a certainty." She paused. "Now, can I bring you anything, Mrs. Crane? A cup of tea? I know it's no good offering you a little something to keep the cold out." Grandma shook her head. "Nothing, thank you. We've got a few wine biscuits, and Fenella has a very nice banana." "Then I'll give you a look later on," said the stewardess, and she went out, shutting the door. What a very small cabin it was. It was like being shut up in a box with Grandma. The dark, round eye above the washstand gleamed at them dully. Fenella felt shy. She stood against the door, still clasping her luggage and the umbrella. Were they going to get undressed in here? Already her Grandma had taken off her bonnet, and, rolling up the strings, she fixed each with a pin to the lining before she hung the bonnet up. Her white hair shone like silk. The little bun at the back was covered with a black net. Fenella hardly ever saw her Grandma with her head uncovered. She looked strange. "I shall put on the woolen fascinator your dear mother crocheted for me. Why can't I say crochet?" said Grandma, and, unstrapping the sausage, she took it out and wound it round her head. The fringe of grey bobbles danced at her eyebrows as she smiled tenderly and mournfully at Fenella. Then she undid her bodice, and something under that, and something else underneath that. Then there seemed a short, sharp tussle, and Grandma flushed faintly. Snip, snap. She had undone her stays. She breathed a sigh of relief, and sitting on the plush couch, she slowly and carefully pulled off her elastic-sided boots and stood them side by side. By the time Fenella had taken off her coat and skirt and put on her flannel dressing gown, Grandma was quite ready. "Must I take off my boots, Grandma? They're lace." Grandma gave them a moment's deep consideration. "You'd feel a great deal more comfortable if you did, child," said she. She kissed Fenella. "Don't forget to say your prayers. Our dear Lord is with us when we are at sea even more than when we are on dry land. And because I am an experienced traveller," said Grandma briskly, "I shall take the upper berth." "But, Grandma, however will you get up there?" 3 little spider-like steps were all Fenella saw. The old woman gave a small silent laugh before she mounted them nimbly, and she peered over the high bunk at the astonished Fenella. "You didn't think your Grandma could do that, did you?" said she. And as she sank back, Fenella heard her light laugh again. The hard square of brown soap would not lather, and the water in the bottle was like a kind of blue jelly. How hard it was, too, to turn down those stiff sheets. You simply had to tear your way in. If everything had been different, Fenella might have got the giggles. At last she was inside, and while she lay there panting, there sounded from above a long, soft whispering, as though someone was gently, gently rustling among tissue paper to find something. It was Grandma saying her prayers. A long time passed. Then the stewardess came in. She trod softly and leaned her hand on Grandma's bunk. "We're just entering the Straits," she said. "Oh." "It's a fine night, but we're rather empty. We may pitch a little." And indeed, at that moment, the Picton boat rose and rose and hung in the air just long enough to give a shiver before she swung down again, and there was the sound of heavy water slapping against her sides. Fenella remembered she had left that swan-necked umbrella standing up on the little couch. If it fell over, would it break? But Grandma remembered too, at the same time. "I wonder if you'd mind, stewardess, laying down my umbrella," she whispered. "Not at all, Miss Crane." And the stewardess, coming back to Grandma, breathed, "Your little granddaughter's in such a beautiful sleep." "God be praised for that," said Grandma. "Poor little motherless mite," said the stewardess. And Grandma was still telling the stewardess all about what happened when Fenella fell asleep. But she hadn't been asleep long enough to dream before she woke up again to see something waving in the air above her head. What was it? What could it be? It was a small grey foot. Now another joined it. They seemed to be feeling about for something. There came a sigh. "I'm awake, Grandma," said Fenella. "Oh, dear, am I near the ladder?" asked Grandma. "I thought it was this end." "No, Grandma, it's the other. I'll put your foot on it." "Are we there?" asked Fenella. "In the harbour," said Grandma. "We must get up, child. You'd better have a biscuit to steady yourself before you move." But Fenella had hopped out of her bunk. The lamp was still burning, but night was over, and it was cold. Peering through that round eye, she could see far off some rocks. Now they were scattered over with foam, now a gull flipped by, and now there came a long piece of real land. "It's land, Grandma," said Fenella, wonderingly, as though they had been at sea for weeks together. She hugged herself. She stood on one leg and rubbed it with the toes of the other foot. She was trembling. Oh, it had been all been so sad lately. Was it going to change? But all her Grandma said was, "Make haste, child. I should leave your nice banana for the stewardess, as you haven't eaten it." And Fenella put on her black clothes again, and a button sprang off one of her gloves and rolled to where she couldn't reach it. They went up on deck. But if it had been cold in the cabin, on deck it was like ice. The sun was not up yet, but the stars were dim, and the cold pale sky was the same colour as the cold pale sea. On the land a white mist rose and fell. Now they could see quite plainly dark bush. Even the shapes of the umbrella ferns showed, and those strange silvery withered trees that are like skeletons. Now they could see the landing stage and some little houses, pale too, clustered together, like shells on the lid of a box. The other passengers tramped up and down, but more slowly than they had the night before, and they looked gloomy. And now the landing stage came out to meet them. Slowly it swam towards the Picton boat, and a man holding a coil of rope, and a cart with a small drooping horse, and another man sitting on the step, came too. "It's Mr. Penready, Fenella, come for us," said Grandma. She sounded pleased. Her white waxen cheeks were blue with cold, her chin trembled, and she had to keep wiping her eyes and her little pink nose. "You've got my—" "Yes, Grandma." Fenella showed it to her. The rope came flying through the air, and smack it fell onto the deck. The gangway was lowered. Again Fenella followed her grandma onto the wharf over to the little cart, and a moment later they were bowling away. The hooves of the little horse drummed over the wooden piles, then sank softly into the sandy road. Not a soul was to be seen. There was not even a feather of smoke. The mist rose and fell, and the sea still sounded asleep as slowly it turned on the beach. "I seen Mr. Crane yesterday," said Mr. Penready. "He looked himself then. Mrs. knocked him up a batch of scones last week." And now the little horse pulled up before one of the shell-like houses. They got down. Fenella put her hand on the gate, and the big, trembling dewdrops soaked through her glove tips. Up a little path of round white pebbles they went, with drenched sleeping flowers on either side. Grandma's delicate white picotees were so heavy with dew that they were fallen, but their sweet smell was part of the cold morning. The blinds were down in the little house. They mounted the steps onto the veranda. A pair of old bluchers was on one side of the door, and a large red water can on the other. "Tut, tut, you're Grandpa," said Grandma. She turned the handle. Not a sound. She called, "Walter!" And immediately a deep voice that sounded half stifled called back, "Was that you, Mary?" "Wait, dear," said Grandma. "Go in there." She pushed Fenella gently into a small dusky sitting room. On the table a white cat that had been folded up like a camel rose, stretched itself, yawned, and then sprang onto the tips of its toes. Fenella buried one cold little hand in the white warm fur, and smiled timidly while she stroked and listened to Grandma's gentle voice and the rolling tones of Grandpa. A door creaked. "Come in, dear." The old woman beckoned. Fenella followed. There, lying to one side of an immense bed, lay Grandpa. Just his head with a white tuft, and his rosy face and long silver beard showed over the quilt. He was like a very old, wide-awake bird. "Well, my girl," said Grandpa, "give us a kiss." Fenella kissed him. "Ugh," said Grandpa, "her little nose is as cold as a button. What's that she's holding? Her grandma's umbrella?" Fenella smiled again, and crooked the swan neck over the bed rail. Above the bed there was a big text in a deep black frame. "Lost. 1 golden hour set with 60 diamond minutes. No reward is offered, for it is gone for ever." "Your grandma painted that," said Grandpa, and he ruffled his white tuft and looked at Fenella so merrily she almost thought he winked at her. The end. I think we might have to read some more Katherine Mansfield. And forgive me for saying this, because I feel like it might be a little bit... It's not necessarily... I guess it's a little bit stereotypical, but in general, it seems that female authors just notice things way more, or at least their characters do. You get a sense, and I imagine, Sam, you've noticed this with what's-her-face, Mary Wilkins Freeman. There's just such an attention to detail in just the little things that you can tell about a person. How dare! I know, right? I don't know. There's just this. I don't know. There's a softness, I guess, which again feels like feminine and all of that. But there are a lot of male authors who do this as well. But it just seems that there's. Yeah, like you probably wouldn't get a male author writing prose like that, like, or the Virginia Woolf, for example. Literally just noticing stuff about people and about relationships and about just day-to-day life, which people in places feel fuller. Yeah, absolutely. You like the description? I know. So did I. And yes, I realised that she is New Zealand. Did I hear someone say? Yeah, Thunder said, Google says New Zealand. Yeah, I think I have heard that Katherine Mansfield is a New Zealander, is a Kiwi. But yeah, I just... And even for a little story that's just basically about a little girl dealing with grief and her dad needing to send her away for a bit so he can deal with it, like, it's just nice that these stories exist. We don't have to have a ghost story. We don't have to have drama. You can just notice little things, and I think that's really lovely. That seems to be a thing with a lot of female authors. It's just great. People and places do indeed feel fuller. But yes, I hope you enjoyed both of those little stories. I certainly did. I thought they were great fun. Well, great fun, but they were good. I will put us to a break. I'm not going to do another cold open after the break, even though I have an entire book of Edward Thomas poems. But maybe next time. But yes, I will chuck us to a break. So go do break-related things, and we shall see you back in about 5 minutes. Bye for now. return. Hello. Yes, I see everybody is chatting about Katherine Mansfield in chat, because so tonight we have, and this is also kind of why I chose these stories. We've got some excellent people, excellent authors here, because we've got Virginia Woolf, very gay, very gay, and also sort of, I guess, representing someone who was dealing with, I think most people think she was dealing with depression, some kind of mental illness. Basically, she was not having a great time, but she was pretty cool, pretty great, and Katherine Mansfield, as we've seen, hella gay as well. Also, yeah, just really good for, like, representation of, well, not representation, but really good for standing against injustice against Maori people, and just great. And May Sinclair, who was a suffragist. So we've got some pretty great women authors tonight. So yeah, we'll have to read some more by these lovely people. Gay melancholic TM, yeah, just a bit. Yeah, it's not really gay panic. It's more gay. I want to say gay depression. That sounds awful. Be gay, write books. Exactly. Be gay, write books, and fight for women's rights. All good stuff. Gay joy. Well, I'm not sure Virginia Woolf had much joy in her life. I don't know. But yeah, but we got women fighting for rights of all sorts of things and people and stuff, which is great. So yeah. But I hope we are enjoying these stories so far. Sort of contrast with what you're reading. A little bit. Although, I don't know if Jerome K. Jerome is a decent person or not. But in general, the kind of old boys club kind of thing, or young boys club, whatever, that Three Men in a Boat is kind of going for is a little different, let's say, than this. Right. You just mean a story about three, privileged oafish buffoons larking about on the Thames. Oh, okay, fair enough, yeah. Yeah, we've got serious authors today. Not that Jerome K. Jerome wasn't a serious author, but I mean, serious in a different way. But yeah, I hope everybody is enjoying it so far. I'm certainly enjoying it. And yeah, I will definitely have to read more of Katherine Mansfield, because that prose was lovely. Really nice, some gorgeous descriptions. Really, really lovely descriptions. And yeah, Virginia Woolf, we'll see. Might read some more of her at some point. But again, as I think it was Andy Pants said, can only take her in small doses. Virginia Woolf can be a bit hard going. Just on a kind of bit of a sort of Debbie Downer kind of vibe. But obviously she actually was struggling with things like depression, so fair enough. But if you're attempting to sort of read something that's a little bit I don't know, maybe more upbeat, a little bit less kind of, well, depressing, then Woolf isn't necessarily the best. But I think she did write some other, she did write some slightly more cheery things, I think. But she does have a really lovely writing style, which I really like. But yes, let us continue with the slightly longer story. Excuse my slurping. I have now got very hot tea, which I will inevitably forget to drink, because I always do, and it'll get cold. But if we're all sitting comfortably and had a good break and did all the things one does, we shall continue with The Victim by May Sinclair. Chapter 1. Stephen Ackroyd, Mr. Greathead's chauffeur, was sulking in the garage. Everybody was afraid of him. Everybody hated him except Mr. Greathead, his master, and Dawsey, his sweetheart. And even Dawsey now, after yesterday. Night had come. On one side, the yard gates stood open to the black tunnel of the drive. On the other, the high moor rose above the wall, immense, darker than the darkness. Stephen's lantern in the open doorway of the garage and Dawsey's lamp in the kitchen window threw a blonde twilight into the yard between. From where he sat, slantways on the step of the car, he could see, through the lighted window, the table with the lamp and Dawsey's sewing huddled up in a white heap as she left it just now, when she had jumped up and gone away, because she was afraid of him. She had gone straight to Mr. Greathead in his study, and Stephen, sulking, had flung himself out into the yard. He stared into the window, thinking. Everybody hated him. He could tell by the damned spiteful way they looked at him in the bar of the King's Arms, kind of sideways and slink-eyed, turning their dirty tails and shuffling out of his way. He had said to Dawsey he'd like to know what he'd done. He'd just dropped in for his glass as usual. He'd looked round and said, "Good evening," civil, and the dirty tykes took no more notice of him than if he'd been a toad. Mrs. Oldershaw, Dawsey's aunt, she hated him, boiled ham face, swelling with spite, shoving his glass at the end of her arm without speaking, as if he'd been a bloody cockroach. All because of the thrashing he'd given young Ned Oldershaw. If she didn't want the cub's neck broken, she'd better keep him out of mischief. Young Ned knew what he'd get if he came meddling with his sweetheart. It had happened yesterday afternoon, Sunday, when he had gone down with Dawsey to the King's Arms to see her aunt. They were sitting out on the wooden bench against the inn wall when young Ned began it. He could see him now with his arm round Dawsey's neck and his mouth gaping, and Dawsey laughing like a silly fool, and the old woman snorting and shaking. He could hear him. "She's my cousin, even if she is your sweetheart. You can't stop me kissing her." Couldn't he? Why, what did they think? When he'd given up his good job at the Darlington Motor Works to come to Easthwaite and black Mr. Greathead's boots, chop wood, carry coal and water for him and drive his shabby second-hand car. Not that he cared what he did, so long as he could live in the same house with Dawsey Oldershaw. It wasn't likely he'd sit like a bloody Moses looking on while Ned... To be sure, he had half killed him. He could feel Ned's neck swelling and rising up under the pressure of his hands, his fingers. He had struck him first, flinging him back against the inn wall, then he had pinned him, till the men ran up and dragged him off. And now they were all against him. Dawsey was against him. She had said she was afraid of him. "Stephen," she had said, "thou might have killed him." "Well, perhaps next time he'll know better than to come meddling with my lass." "I'm not thy lass, if you canna keep your hands off folks. I should be feared for my life of thee. Ned weren't doing no harm." "If he does it again, if he comes between me and thee, Dawsey, I shall do him in." "Nah, thou maunna talk that road." "It's God's truth. Anybody that comes between thee and me, love, I shall do him in. If 'twas thy aunt, I should wring her neck, same as I wrung Ned's." "And if it were me, Stephen?" "If it were thee, if thou left me. Ah, don't thou ask me, Dawsey. There, that's all that scares me." "But thou hasna left me. 'Tis thy wedding clothes thou'rt making." "Aye, 'tis my wedding clothes." She had started fingering the white stuff, looking at it with her head on one side, smiling prettily. Then all of a sudden she had flung it down in a heap and burst out crying. When he tried to comfort her, she pushed him off and ran out of the room to Mr. Greathead. It must have been half an hour ago, and she had not come back yet. He got up and went through the yard gates into the dark drive. Turning there, he came to the house front and the lighted window of the study. Hidden behind a clump of yew, he looked in. Mr. Greathead had risen from his chair. He was a little old man, shrunk and pinched, with a bowed narrow back and slender neck under his grey hanks of hair. Dorsey stood before him, facing Stephen. The lamplight fell full on her. Her sweet flower face was flushed. She had been crying. Mr. Greathead spoke. "Well, that's my advice," he said. "Think it over, Dorsey, before you do anything." That night Dorsey packed her boxes, and the next day at noon, when Stephen came in for his dinner, she had left the lodge. She had gone back to her father's house in Garthdale. She wrote to Stephen saying that she had thought it over and found she daren't marry him. She was afraid of him. She would be too unhappy. Excuse clicking neck. Chapter 2. That was the old man. The old man. He had made her give him up. But for that, Dorsey would never have left him. She would never have thought of it herself. And she would never have got away if he had been there to stop her. It wasn't Ned. Ned was going to marry Nancy Peacock down at Woolf. Ned hadn't done any harm. It was Mr. Greathead who had come between them. He hated Mr. Greathead. His hate became a nausea of physical loathing that never ceased. Indoors, he served Mr. Greathead as footman and valet, waiting on him at meals, bringing the hot water for his bath, helping him to dress and undress, so that he could never get away from him. When he came to call him in the morning, Stephen's stomach heaved at the sight of the shrunken body under the bedclothes, the flushed, pinched face with its peaked, finicking nose upturned, the thin silver tuft of hair pricked up above the pillow's edge. Stephen shivered with hate at the sound of the rattling old man's cough and the shoop-shoop of the feet shuffling along the flagged passages. He had once had a feeling of tenderness for Mr. Greathead as the tie that bound him to Dorsey. He even brushed his coat and hat tenderly, as if he loved them. Once Mr. Greathead's small, close smile, the greyish bud of the lower lip pushed out, the upper lip lifted at the corners, and his kind, thin, "Thank you, my lad," had made Stephen smile back, glad to serve Dorsey's master. And Mr. Greathead would smile again and say, "It does me good to see your bright face, Stephen." Now Stephen's face writhed in a tight contortion to meet Mr. Greathead's kindliness, while his throat ran dry and his heart shook with hate. At meal-times, from his place by the sideboard, he would look on at Mr. Greathead eating in a contemplative disgust. He could have snatched the plate away from under the slow, fumbling hands that hovered and hesitated. He would catch words coming into his mind. He ought to be dead. He ought to be dead. To think that this thing that ought to be dead, this old shrivelled skin bag of creaking bones, should come between him and Dorsey, should have power to drive Dorsey from him. One day, when he was brushing Mr. Greathead's soft felt hat, a paroxysm of hatred gripped him. He hated Mr. Greathead's hat. He took a stick and struck at it again and again. He threw it on the flags and stamped on it, clenching his teeth and drawing in his breath with a sharp hiss. He picked up the hat, looking round furtively, for fear lest Mr. Greathead or Dorsey's successor, Mrs. Blenkiron, should have seen him. He pinched and pulled it back into shape, and brushed it carefully, and hung it on the stand. He was ashamed, not of his violence, but of its futility. Nobody but a damned fool, he said to himself, would have done that. He must have been mad. It wasn't as if he didn't know what he was going to do. He had known ever since the day when Dorsey left him. "I shan't be myself again till I've done him in," he thought. He was only waiting till he had planned it out, till he was sure of every detail, till he was fit and cool. There must be no hesitation, No uncertainty at the last minute, above all, no blind, headlong violence. Nobody but a fool would kill in mad rage and forget things and be caught and swing for it. Yet that was what they all did. There was always something they hadn't thought of that gave them away. Stephen had thought of everything, even the date, even the weather. Mr. Greathead was in the habit of going up to London to attend the debates of a learned society he belonged to that held its meetings in May and November. He always travelled up by the 5 o'clock train so that he might go to bed and rest as soon as he arrived. He always stayed for a week and gave his housekeeper a week's holiday. Stephen chose a dark, threatening day in November when Mr. Greathead was going up to his meeting and Mrs. Blenkiron had left Easthwaite for Morph by the early morning bus, so that there was nobody in the house but Mr. Greathead and Stephen. Easthwaite Lodge stands alone, grey, hidden between the shoulder of the moor and the ash trees of its drive. It is approached by a bridle path across the moor, a turning off the road that runs from Easthwaite in Rathdale to Shaw in Westleydale, about a mile from the village and a mile from Hardraw Pass. No tradesman visited it. Mr. Greathead's letters and his newspaper were shot into a post-box that hung on the ash tree at the turn. The hot water laid on in the house was not hot enough for Mr. Greathead's bath, so that every morning, while Mr. Greathead shaved, Stephen came to him with a can of boiling water. Mr. Greathead, dressed in a mauve and grey striped sleeping suit, stood shaving himself before the looking-glass that hung on the wall beside the great white bath. Stephen waited with his hand on the cold tap, watching the bright curved rod of water falling with a thud and a splash. In the white, stagnant light from the muffed window pane, the knife-blade flame of a small oil stove flickered queerly. The oil sputtered and stank. Suddenly the wind hissed in the water pipes and cut off the glittering rod. To Stephen it seemed the suspension of all movement. He would have to wait there till the water flowed again before he could begin. He tried not to look at Mr. Greathead and the lean wattles of his lifted throat. He fixed his eyes on the long crack in the soiled green distemper of the wall. His nerves were on edge with waiting for the water to flow again. The fumes of the oil stove worked on them like a rank intoxicant. The soiled green wall gave him a sensation of physical sickness. He picked up a towel and hung it over the back of a chair. Thus he caught sight of his own face in the glass above Mr. Greathead's. It was livid against the soiled green wall. Stephen stepped aside to avoid it. "Don't you feel well, Stephen?" "No, sir." Stephen picked up a small sponge and looked at it. Mr. Greathead had laid down his razor and was wiping the lather from his chin. At that instant, with a gurgling, spluttering haste, the water leaped from the tap. It was then that Stephen made his sudden, quiet rush. He first gagged Mr. Greathead with the sponge, then pushed him back and back against the wall and pinned him there with both hands round his neck, as he had pinned Ned Aldershaw. He pressed in on Mr. Greathead's throat, strangling him. Mr. Greathead's hands flapped in the air, trying feebly to beat Stephen off. Then his arms, pushed back by the heave and thrust of Stephen's shoulders, dropped. Then Mr. Greathead's body sank, sliding along the wall, and fell to the floor. Stephen still keeping his hold, mounting it, gripping it with his knees. His fingers tightened, pressing back the blood. Mr. Greathead's face swelled up. It changed horribly. There was a groaning and rattling sound in his throat. Stephen pressed in till it had ceased. Then he stripped himself to the waist. He stripped Mr. Greathead of his sleeping suit and hung his naked body face downwards in the bath. He took the razor and cut the great arteries and veins in the neck. He pulled up the plug of the waste pipe and left the body to drain in the running water. He left it all day and all night. He had noticed that murderers swung just for want of attention to little things like that, messing up themselves and the whole place with blood, always forgetting something essential. He had no time to think of horrors. From the moment he had murdered Mr. Greathead, his own neck was in danger. He was simply using all his brain and nerve to save his neck. He worked with the stern, cool hardness of a man going through with an unpleasant, necessary job. He had thought of everything. He had even thought of the dairy. It was built onto the back of the house under the shelter of the high moor. You entered it through the scullery, which cut it off from the yard. The window panes had been removed and replaced by sheets of perforated zinc. A large corrugated glass skylight lit it from the roof. Impossible either to see in or to approach it from the outside. It was fitted up with a long black slate shelf, placed, for the convenience of buttermakers, at the height of an ordinary workbench. Stephen had his tools, a razor, a carving knife, a chopper and a meat saw, laid there ready, beside a great pile of cotton waste. Early the next day he took Mr. Greathead's body out of the bath, wrapped a thick towel round the neck and head, carried it down to the dairy and stretched it out on the slab. And there he cut it up into 17 pieces. These he wrapped in several layers of newspaper, covering the face and the hands first, because at the last moment they frightened him. He sewed them up in 2 sacks and hid them in the cellar. He burnt the towel and the cotton waste in the kitchen fire. He cleaned his tools thoroughly and put them back in their places, and he washed down the marble slab. There wasn't a spot on the floor except for one flagstone where the pink rinsing of the slab had splashed over. He scrubbed it for half an hour, still seeing the rusty edges of the splash long after he had scoured it out. He then washed and dressed himself with care. As it was wartime, Stephen could only work by day, for the light in the dairy roof would have attracted the attention of the police. He had murdered Mr. Greathead on a Tuesday. It was now 3 o'clock on Thursday afternoon. Exactly at 10 minutes past 4 he had brought out the car, shut in close with its black hood and side curtains. He had packed Mr. Greathead's suitcase and placed it in the car with his umbrella, railway rug and travelling cap. Also, in a bundle, the clothes that his victim would have gone to London in. He stowed the body in the 2 sacks beside him on the front. By Hardraw Pass, halfway between Easthwaite and Shore, there are 3 round pits, known as the churns, hollowed out of the grey rock and said to be bottomless. Stephen had thrown stones, big as a man's chest, down the largest pit, to see whether they would be caught on any ledge or boulder. They had dropped clean, without a sound. It poured with rain, the rain that Stephen had reckoned on. The pass was dark under the clouds and deserted. Stephen turned his car so that the headlights glared on the pit's mouth. Then he ripped open the sacks and threw down, one by one, the 17 pieces of Mr. Greathead's body, and the sacks after them, and the clothes. It was not enough to dispose of Mr. Greathead's dead body. He had to behave as though Mr. Greathead were alive. Mr. Greathead had disappeared, and he had to account for his disappearance. He drove on to Shore Station to the 5 o'clock train, taking care to arrive close on its starting. A troop train was due to depart a minute earlier. Stephen, who had reckoned on the darkness and the rain, reckoned also on the hurry and confusion on the platform. As he had foreseen, there were no porters in the station entry, nobody to notice whether Mr. Greathead was or was not in the car. He carried his things through onto the platform and gave the suitcase to an old man to label. He dashed into the booking office and took Mr. Greathead's ticket, then rushed along the platform as if he were following his master. He heard himself shouting to the guard, "Have you seen Mr. Greathead?" And the guard's answer, "No," and his own inspired statement, "He must have taken his seat in the front then." He ran on to the front of the train, shouldering his way among the troops. The drawn blinds of the carriages favoured him. Stephen thrust the umbrella, the rug and the travelling cap into an empty compartment and slammed the door to. He tried to shout something through the open window, but his tongue was harsh and dry against the roof of his mouth, and no sound came. He stood, blocking the window till the guard whistled. When the train moved, he ran alongside with his hand on the window ledge, as though he were taking the last instructions of his master. A porter pulled him back. "Quick work, that," said Stephen. Before he left the station, he wired to Mr. Greathead's London hotel, announcing the time of his arrival. He felt nothing. Nothing but the intense relief of a man who has saved himself by his own wits from a most horrible death. There were even moments in the week that followed when, so powerful was the illusion of his innocence, he could have believed that he had really seen Mr. Greathead off by the 5 o'clock train. Moments where he literally stood still in amazement before his own incredible impunity. Other moments when a sort of vanity uplifted him. He had committed a murder that for sheer audacity and cool brainwork surpassed all murders celebrated in the history of crime. Unfortunately, the very perfection of his achievement doomed it to oblivion. He had left not a trace. Not a trace. Only when he woke in the night, a doubt sickened him. There was the rusted ring of that splash on the dairy floor. He wondered, had he really washed it out clean? And he would get up and light a candle and go down to the dairy to make sure. He knew the exact place. Bending over it with the candle, he could imagine that he still saw a faint outline. Daylight reassured him. He knew the exact place, but nobody else knew. There was nothing to distinguish it from the natural stains in the flagstone. Nobody would guess. But he was glad when Mrs. Blenkiron came back again. On the day that Mr. Greathead was to have come home by the 4 o'clock train, Stephen drove into Shaw and bought a chicken for the master's dinner. He met the 4 o'clock train and expressed surprise that Mr. Greathead had not come by it. He said he would be sure to come by the 7. He ordered dinner for 8. Mrs. Blenkiron roasted the chicken, and Stephen met the 7 o'clock train. This time he showed uneasiness. The next day he met all the trains and wired to Mr. Greathead's hotel for information. When the manager wired back that Mr. Greathead had not arrived, he wrote to his relatives and gave notice to the police. 3 weeks passed. The police and Mr. Greathead's relatives accepted Stephen's statements, backed as they were by the evidence of the booking office clerk, the telegraph clerk, the guard, the porter who had labelled Mr. Greathead's luggage, and the hotel manager who had received his telegram. Mr. Greathead's portrait was published in the illustrated papers, with requests for any information which might lead to his discovery. Nothing happened, and presently he and his disappearance were forgotten. The nephew who came down to Easthwaite to look into his affairs was satisfied. His balance at his bank was low, owing to the non-payment of various dividends, but the accounts and the contents of Mr. Greathead's cash-box and bureau were in order, and Stephen had put down every penny he had spent. The nephew paid Mrs. Blenkiron's wages and dismissed her, and arranged with a chauffeur to stay on and take care of the house. And as Stephen saw that this was the best way to escape suspicion, he stayed on. Only in Westleydale and Rathdale excitement lingered. People wondered and speculated. Mr. Greathead had been robbed and murdered in the train. Stephen said he had had money on him. He had lost his memory and wandered goodness knows where. He had thrown himself out of the railway carriage. Stephen said Mr. Greathead wouldn't do that, but he shouldn't be surprised if he had lost his memory. He knew a man who forgot who he was and where he lived, didn't know his own wife and children. Shell shock. And lately Mr. Greathead's memory hadn't been what it was. Soon as he got it back, he'd turn up again. Stephen wouldn't be surprised to see him walking in any day. But on the whole, people noticed that he didn't care to talk much about Mr. Greathead. They thought this showed very proper feeling. They were sorry for Stephen. He had lost his master, and he had lost Dorsey Oldershaw. And if he did half kill Ned Oldershaw, well, young Ned had no business to go meddling with his sweetheart. Even Mrs. Oldershaw was sorry for him. And when Stephen came into the bar of the King's Arms, everybody said, "Good evening, Steve," and made room for him by the fire. Chapter 3. Stephen came and went now as if nothing had happened. He made a point of keeping the house as it would be kept if Mr. Greathead were alive. Mrs. Blenkiron, coming in once a fortnight to wash and clean, found the fire lit in Mr. Greathead's study and his slippers standing on end in the fender. Upstairs his bed was made, the clothes folded back, ready. This ritual guarded Stephen not only from the suspicions of outsiders, but from his own knowledge. By behaving as though he believed that Mr. Greathead was still living, he almost made himself believe it. By refusing to let his mind dwell on the murder, he came to forget it. His imagination saved him, playing the play that kept him sane, till the murder became vague to him and fantastic, like a thing done in a dream. He had waked up, and this was the reality, this round of caretaking, this look the house had of waiting for Mr. Greathead to come back to it. He had left off getting up in the night to examine the place on the dairy floor. He was no longer amazed at his impunity. Then suddenly, when he really had forgotten, it ended. It was on a Saturday in January, about 5 o'clock. Stephen had heard that Dorsey Oldershaw was back again, living at the King's Arms with her aunt. He had a mad, uncontrollable longing to see her again. But it was not Dorsey that he saw. His way from the lodge kitchen into the drive was through the yard gates and along the flagged path under the sturdy window. When he turned onto the flags, he saw it shuffling along before him. The lamplight from the window lit it up. He could see distinctly the little old man in the long, shabby black overcoat with the grey woolen muffler round his neck hunched up above his collar, lifting the thin grey hair that stuck out under the slouch of the black hat. In the first moment he saw it, Stephen had no fear. He simply felt that the murder had not happened, that he really had dreamt it, and that this was Mr. Greathead come back, alive among the living. The phantasm was now standing at the door of the house, its hand on the doorknob, as if about to enter. But when Stephen came up to the door, it was not there. He stood, fixed, staring at the space which had emptied itself so horribly. His heart heaved and staggered, snatching at his breath. And suddenly the memory of the murder rushed at him. He saw himself in the bathroom, shut in with his victim by the soiled green walls. He smelt the reek of the oil stove. He heard the water running from the tap. He felt his feet springing forward, and his fingers pressing tighter and tighter on Mr. Greathead's throat. He saw Mr. Greathead's hands flapping helplessly, his terrified eyes, his face swelling and discoloured, changing horribly, and his body sinking to the floor. He saw himself in the dairy afterwards. He could hear the thudding, grinding, scraping noises of his tools. He saw himself on Hardraw Pass and the headlights glaring on the pit's mouth. and the fear and the horror he had not felt then came on him now. He turned back. He bolted the yard gates and all the doors of the house and shut himself up in the lighted kitchen. He took up his magazine, the autocar, and forced himself to read it. Presently, his terror left him. He said to himself, it was nothing but his fancy. He didn't suppose he'd ever see anything again. 3 days passed. On the third evening, Stephen had lit the study lamp and was bolting the window when he saw it again. It stood on the path outside, close against the window, looking in. He saw its face distinctly, the greyish stuck-out bud of the underlip and the droop of the pinched nose. The small eyes peered at him, glittering. The whole figure had a glassy look between the darkness behind it and the pane. One moment it stood outside, looking in, and the next it was mixed up with the shimmering picture of the lighted room that hung there on the blackness of the trees. Mr. Greathead then showed as if reflected, standing with Stephen in the room. And now he was outside again, looking at him through the pane. Stephen's stomach sank and dragged, making him feel sick. He pulled down the blind between him and Mr. Greathead, clamped the shutters too, and drew the curtains over them. He locked and double-bolted the front door, all the doors, to keep Mr. Greathead out. But once that night, as he lay in bed, he heard the shoop-shoop of feet shuffling along the flagged passages, up the stairs and across the landing outside his door. The door handle rattled, but nothing came. He lay awake till morning, the sweat running off his skin, his heart plunging and quivering with terror. When he got up, he saw a white, scared face in the looking-glass. A face with a half-open mouth, ready to blab, to blurt out his secret. The face of an idiot. He was afraid to take that face into Easthwaite or into Shaw. So he shut himself up in the house, half-starved on his small stock of bread, bacon and groceries. 2 weeks passed, and then it came again in broad daylight. It was Mrs. Blenkiron's morning. He had lit the fire in the study at noon and set up Mr. Greathead's slippers in the fender. When he rose from his stooping and turned round, he saw Mr. Greathead's phantasm standing on the hearthrug close in front of him. It was looking at him and smiling in a sort of mockery, as if amused at what Stephen had been doing. It was solid and completely lifelike at first. Then, as Stephen in his terror backed and backed away from it, he was afraid to turn and feel it there behind him. Its feet became insubstantial. As if undermined, the whole structure sank and fell together on the floor, where it made a pool of some whitish, glistening substance that mixed with the pattern of the carpet and sank through. That was the most horrible thing it had done yet, and Stephen's nerve broke under it. He went to Mrs. Blenkiron, whom he found scrubbing out the dairy. She sighed as she wrung out the floorcloth. These old yellow stones, scrub as you will, they'll never look clean. No, he said. Scrub and scrub. You'll never get them clean. She looked up at him. Lad, what ails he? You've got a face like a wrung dishcloth hanging o'er the sink. I've got the colic. Aye, and no wonder with the damp, and they misties and your own bad cooking. Let me run down to King's Arms and get you a drop of whiskey. Nah, I'll go down myself. He knew now he was afraid to be left alone in the house. Down at the King's Arms, Dorsey and Mrs. Oldershaw were sorry for him. By this time he was really ill with fright. Dorsey and Mrs. Oldershaw said it was a chill. They made him lie down on the settle by the kitchen fire and put a rug over him, and gave him stiff hot grog to drink. He slept, and when he woke he found Dorsey sitting beside him with her sewing. He sat up, and her hand was on his shoulder. "Lay still, lad." I mun get up and go." "Nay, there's no call for ye to go. Lay still and I'll make thee a cup of tea." He lay still. Mrs. Oldershaw had made up a bed for him in her son's room, and they kept him there that night until 4 o'clock the next day. When he got up to go, Dorsey put on her coat and hat. "Is thou going out, Dorsey?" "Aye, I canna let thee go and sit there by thysen. I'm coming up to sit with thee till night time." She came up, and they sat side by side in the lodge kitchen by the fire, as they used to sit when they were together there, holding each other's hands and not talking. "Dorsey," he said at last, "what hast thou come for? Has thou come to tell me thou'll never speak to me again?" "Nay, thou knows what I've come for." "To say thou'll marry me?" "Aye." "I munna marry thee, Dorsey. 'Twouldn't be right." "Right? What does thou mean? 'Twouldn't be right for me to come and sit with thee this road if I don't marry ye." "Nay, I darena. Thou said thou was afraid of me, Dorsey. I don't want ye to be afraid. Thou said thou'd be unhappy. I don't want ye to be unhappy. That was last year. I'm not afraid of ye now, Steve." "Thou don't know me, lass." "Aye, I know thee. I know thou's sick and starved for want of me. Thou canna live without thy own lass to take care of thee." She rose. "I mun go now, but I'll be up tomorrow and the next day." And tomorrow and the next day and the next, at dusk, the hour that Stephen most dreaded, Dorsey came. She sat with him till long after the night had fallen. Stephen would have felt safe so long as she was with him, but for his fear that Mr. Greathead would appear to him while she was there, and that she would see him. If Dorsey knew he was being haunted, she might guess why. Or Mr. Greathead might take some horrible blood-dripping and dismembered shape that would show her how he had been murdered. It would be like him, dead, to come between them as he had come when he was living. They were sitting at the round table by the fireside. The lamp was lit, and Dorsey was bending over her sewing. Suddenly she looked up, her head on one side, listening. Far away inside the house, on the flagged passage from the front door, he could hear the shoop-shoop of the footsteps. He could almost believe that Dorsey shivered. And somehow, for some reason, this time he was not afraid. "Stephen," she said, "didst thou hear anything?" No but to wind on the roogs. She looked at him, a long, wondering look. Apparently it satisfied her, for she answered, "Aye, maybe 'tis no but wind," and went on with her sewing. He drew his chair nearer to her to protect her if it came. He could almost touch her where she sat. The latch lifted. The door opened, and, his entrance and his passage unseen, Mr. Greathead stood before them. The table hid the lower half of his form, but above it he was steady and solid in his terrible semblance of flesh and blood. Stephen looked at Dorsey. She was staring at the phantasm with an innocent, wondering stare that had no fear in it at all. Then she looked at Stephen, an uneasy, frightened, searching look, as though to make sure whether he had seen it. That was her fear, that he should see it, that he should be frightened, that he should be haunted. He moved closer and put his hand on her shoulder. He thought, perhaps, she might shrink from him because she knew it was he who was haunted. But no, she put up her hand and held his, gazing up into his face and smiling. Then, to his amazement, the phantasm smiled back at them, not with mockery, but with a strange and terrible sweetness. Its face lit up for one instant with a sudden, beautiful, shining light. Then it was gone. "Did thou see him, Steve?" "Aye." "Has thou seen anything afore?" "Aye, 3 times I've seen him." "Is it that has scared thee?" "Who told thee I was scared?" "I know it, because nowt can happen to thee, but I mun know it." "What does thou think, Darcy?" "I think thou needna be scared, Steve. He's a kind ghost. Whatever he is, he don't mean thee no harm. T'old gentleman never did when he was alive." "Didn't he? Didn't he? He served me the worst turn he could when he come between thee and me." "Whatever makes ye think that, lad?" "I don't think it, I know." "Nay, love, thou dostna." He did, I tell thee." "Don't say that," she cried. "Don't say it, Stevie." "Why shouldn't I?" That'll set folk talking that road." "What do they know to talk about?" "If they was to remember what thou said."
"And what did I say?"
"Why, that if anybody was to come between thee and me, thou'd do them in."
"I wasna thinking of him. God knows I wasna."
"They don't," she said.
Thou knows I didn't mean him."
"Aye, I know, Steve."
"And, Darcy, thou not afraid of me? Thou aren't afraid of me any more?"
"Nay, lad, I love thee too much. I shall never be afraid of thee again. Would I come to thee this road if I was afraid?"
"Thou'll be afraid now."
"And what should I be afraid of?"
"Why, him."
"Him? I should be a deal more afraid to think of 'ee sitting with them up here by thy sin, when they come down and sleep at aunt's."
"That I wunna, but I shall set 'ee on t' road past the moor."
He went with her down the bridle path and across the moor and along the main road that led through Easthwaite. They parted at the turn where the lights of the village came in sight. The moon had risen as Stephen went back across the moor. The ash tree at the bridle path stood out clear, its hooked, bending branches black against the grey moorgrass. The shadows in the ruts laid stripes along the bridle path, black on grey. The house was black-grey in the darkness of the drive. Only the lighted study window made a golden square in its long wall. Before he could go up to bed, he would have to put out the study lamp. He was nervous, but he no longer felt the sickening and sweating terror of the first hauntings. Either he was getting used to it, or something had happened to him. He had closed the shutters and put out the lamp. His candle made a ring of light around the table in the middle of the room. He was about to take it up and go when he heard a thin voice calling his name. "Stephen." He raised his head to listen. The thin thread of sound seemed to come from outside, a long way off, at the end of the bridle path. "Stephen! Stephen!" This time he could have sworn the sound came from inside his head, like the hiss of air in his ears. "Stephen!" He knew the voice now. It was behind him in the room. He turned and saw the phantasm of Mr. Greathead sitting as he used to sit, in the armchair by the fire. The form was dim in the dusk of the room outside the ring of candlelight. Stephen's first movement was to snatch up the candlestick and hold it between him and the phantasm, hoping that the light would cause it to disappear. Instead of disappearing, the figure became clear and solid, indistinguishable from a figure of flesh and blood dressed in black broadcloth and white linen. Its eyes had the shining transparency of blue crystal. They were fixed on Stephen with a look of quiet, benevolent attention. Its small, narrow mouth was lifted at the corners, smiling. It spoke. "You needn't be afraid," it said. The voice was natural now, quiet, measured, slightly quavering. Instead of frightening Stephen, it soothed and steadied him. He put the candle on the table behind him and stood up before the phantasm, fascinated. "Why are you afraid?" it asked. Stephen couldn't answer. He could only stare, held there by the shining, hypnotizing eyes. "You are afraid," it said, "because you think I'm what you call a ghost, a supernatural thing. You think I'm dead and that you killed me. You think you took a horrible revenge for a wrong you thought I did you. You think I've come back to frighten you, to revenge myself in my turn. And every one of those thoughts of yours, Stephen, is wrong. I'm real, and my appearance is as natural and real as anything in this room. More natural and more real if you did but know. You didn't kill me, as you see, for here I am, as alive, more alive than you are. Your revenge consisted in removing me from a state which had become unbearable to a state more delightful than you can imagine. I don't mind telling you, Stephen, that I was in serious financial difficulties, which, by the way, is a good thing for you because it provides a plausible motive for my disappearance. So that, as far as revenge goes, the thing was a complete frost. You were my benefactor. Your methods were somewhat violent, and I admit you gave me some disagreeable moments before my actual deliverance. But as I was already developing rheumatoid arthritis, there can be no doubt that in your hands my death was more merciful than if it had been left to nature. As for the subsequent arrangements, I congratulate you, Stephen, on your coolness and resource. I always said you were equal to any emergency, and that your brains would pull you safe through any scrape. You committed an appalling and dangerous crime, a crime of all things the most difficult to conceal, and you contrived so that it was not discovered, and never will be discovered. And no doubt the details of this crime seemed to you horrible and revolting to the last degree, and the more horrible and the more revolting they were, the more you piqued yourself on your nerve in carrying the thing through without a hitch. I don't want to put you entirely out of conceit with your performance. It was very creditable for a beginner, very creditable indeed. But let me tell you, this idea of things being horrible and revolting is all illusion. The terms are purely relative to your limited perceptions. I'm speaking now to your intelligence. I don't mean that practical ingenuity which enabled you to dispose of me so neatly. When I say intelligence, I mean intelligence. All you did then was to redistribute matter. To our incorruptible sense, matter never takes any of those offensive forms in which it so often appears to you. Nature has evolved all this horror and repulsion just to prevent people from making too many little experiments like yours. You mustn't imagine that these things have any eternal importance. Don't flatter yourself you've electrified the universe. For minds no longer attached to flesh and blood, that horrible butchery you were so proud of, Stephen, is simply silly. No more terrifying than the spilling of red ink or the rearrangement of a jigsaw puzzle. I saw the whole business, and I can assure you I felt nothing but intense amusement. Your face, Stephen, was so absurdly serious. You've no idea what you looked like with that chopper. I'd have appeared to you then and told you so, only I knew I should frighten you into fits. And there's another grand mistake, my lad.
You're thinking that I'm haunting you out of revenge, that I'm trying to frighten you. My dear Stephen, if I'd wanted to frighten you, I'd have appeared in a very different shape. I needn't remind you what shape I might have appeared in. What do you suppose I've come for?" "I don't know," said Stephen in a husky whisper. "Tell me." "I've come to forgive you, and to save you from the horror you would have felt sooner or later, and to stop you going on with your crime." "You needn't," Stephen said. "I'm not going on with it. I shall do no more murders." "There you are again. Can't you understand that I'm not talking about your silly butcher's work? I'm talking about your real crime. Your real crime was hating me. And your very hate was a blunder, Stephen. You hated me for something I hadn't done." "Aye? What did you do? Tell me that." "You thought I came between you and your sweetheart. That night when Dawsey spoke to me, you thought I told her to throw you over, didn't you?" "Aye." "And what did you tell her?" "I told her to stick to you. It was you, Stephen, who drove her away. You frightened the child. She said she was afraid for her life of you. Not because you half killed that poor boy, but because of the look on your face before you did it. The look of hate, Stephen. I told her not to be afraid of you. I told her that if she threw you over, you might go altogether to the devil, that she might even be responsible for some crime. I told her that if she married you and was faithful, if she loved you, I'd answer for it you'd never go wrong. She was too frightened to listen to me. Then I told her to think over what I'd said before she did anything. You heard me say that." "Aye, that's what I heard you say. I didn't know. I thought you'd set her against me." "If you don't believe me, you can ask her, Stephen." "That's what she said till the night, that you never come between her and me, never." "Never," the phantasm said. "And you don't hate me now?" No, I should never have hated thee. I should never have laid a finger on thee if I'd known." "It's not your laying fingers on me, it's your hatred that matters. If that's done with, the whole thing's done with." "Is it? Is it? If it was known, I should have to hang for it. Mun I give myself up? Tell me, mun I give myself up?" "You want me to decide that for you?" "Aye. Don't go," he said. "Don't go." It seemed to him that Mr. Greathead's phantasm was getting a little thin, as if it couldn't last more than an instant. He had never so longed for it to go as he longed now for it to stay and help him. "Well, Stephen, any flesh-and-blood man would tell you to go and get hanged tomorrow, that it was no more than your plain duty. But I dare say there are some mean vindictive spirits even in my world who would say the same, not because they think death important, because they know you do, and want to get even with you that way. It isn't my way. I consider this little affair as strictly between ourselves. There isn't a jury of flesh and blood men who would understand it. They all think death so important." "What do you want me to do then? Tell me and I'll do it. Tell me!" He cried it out loud, for Mr. Greathead's phantasm was getting thinner and thinner. It dwindled and fluttered, like a light going down. Its voice came from somewhere away outside, from the other end of the bridle path. "Go on living," it said. "Marry Dawsey." "I darena. She don't know I killed thee." "Oh, yes." The eyes flickered up, gentle and ironic. "She does. She knew all the time." And with that, the phantasm went out. The end. So I really like that as a twist. I really like that as a twist. Because now it's just like, is she scared that he would kill her? Or is she kind of into that? Who knows? Yikes indeed. Yes, apologies. I entirely forgot to put a content warning at the beginning there. Sorry, my bad. Graphic details of murder and disposal of a body. Whoops. Sorry. Yeah, that's going to be a fun relationship, isn't it? Or maybe he's been scared out of being an arse, but I kind of don't think so. Also, May Sinclair, we need to talk about the detail in which you're talking about murder here, because that was pretty detailed. That was someone who's looked it up. Just a little bit. Just a bit. You were more bothered by him in general than the details. Oh, okay. Yes, he's a delightful man. Absolutely delightful. Also, yes, if anybody was reading along, that was really difficult to read because I read it through and I thought, is this Scottish? Because it's all written in dialect, I was like, is this Scottish? I was like, no, it's Thwaite. Thwaite's, that's a Yorkshire thing, that's a northern thing. Places called East Thwaite and Grasmere and all of that kind of thing. It's a Cumbrian thing, mainly. And so I was like, okay, so this is northern? So yeah, it was entertaining. There's some Yorkshire terms in there, yeah, exactly. Also, hello Ketar Cat, sorry you've come in at the end. Lovely to see you though. The best authors are on several lists. Yeah, that's true, especially crime authors. But yeah, I quite like that as a ghost story / murder story. Just because of the twist. Ghost just like, yeah, thanks, you helped me, cheers. I was in financial difficulties. You did me a solid. Thanks, mate. And in a way, that is more horrifying than a vengeful ghost for the whatever his name is, Stephen. So yeah. So yes, I hope we have enjoyed our 3 stories by female authors today. I will have to try and find some more by by any of them really. I mean, there is plenty more I know that Virginia Woolf wrote, but the other 2 I will have to have a little look. But yes, I hope we enjoyed that. It's lovely to see so many of you here. Thank you ever so much. You're all wonderful. Let us see. Shall we see if nice choices? Oh, I'm glad you think so. And thank you all for listening. Yeah. Ooh, Stephen is not power washing tonight. He is playing Grimoire Groves, which sounds fun. I mean, there's also Adam playing Street Fighter, Seabats. But from Stephen to Stephen, yeah. I feel like should we go to Stephen or should we go to Adam? I will let Sam decide because I'm delegating. Because that's easier. Also, I don't know, Sam, if you were listening to the first story, but the first story was very grounded vibes. Like it was talking about snails seeing leaves like a big roof. I was like, oh, we've just been playing Grounded. It's great. You've misheard the first one. Boo! You call yourself a streamer. It's fine. Yes, okay, let's go and say hi to Stephen. You probably all know Stephen by now. Stephen Joys, lovely stream, lovely person, lovely community, lovely everything. Usually plays very chill games. Don't know what Grimoire Groves is, but it sounds cool. So go on over, say hi, and yeah, we shall see you hopefully on Saturday. Oh, actually no, we probably won't see you this Saturday because stuff is happening for Sam and I. Maybe Friday, not entirely sure. Either there will be a stream this weekend at a different time than normal, or there won't be. We shall see. But next Wednesday will be more short stories from me. So yes, thank you ever so much. Have a lovely rest of the week, everybody. And yeah, we shall see you again soon. Goodbye and good night.